The new documentary Cunningham looks at the life and work of famous choreographer Merce Cunningham. I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby, here with film director Alla Kovgan. And Alla, for people who don't know the name Merce Cunningham, explain who this guy is and why and what he brought to the world of dance that made you want to embark on covering this.
Well, in 2 words, he's one of the most influential choreographers the world has known. And he is notorious for using chance methods as a way to choreograph. And also, he separated music from dance. So he basically did not make dances to music. He invented his own technique, Cunningham technique. And he also collaborated with very many visual artists in, actually, I think all over America, but particularly those artists who were living in New York City after World War II.
And one of the things that is so kind of interesting about this film is the fact that it is a combination of him, you get his kind of narration as well as some of the narration from people who knew him, set against these kind of recreation of these famous dance techniques. So how, you said that this project took what, I think 7 years to do. How did you arrive at wanting to tell the story this way with the combination of his voice and then these recreations of his dances?
Well, it's interesting because, I always say that I never wanted to make a film about Merce Cunningham. He kind of choreographer who works in space, and he, he would have 16 people going different directions and you cannot make a single shot. But, when 3D showed up and it came out around when, 3D has been around for a long time, but the inventors made a film called Pina about choreographer Pina Bausch. And when I watched it, I really felt that there's some possibility here with 3D and dance that hasn't been realized. Inventors sort of choreographed, human eye almost, and sort of. So that all coincided with the closure of Merce Cunningham Dance Company, and in 2011, and I remember sitting there very clearly, that moment, watching the last performances of the Cunningham Company, and I felt that perhaps Merce and 3D can be a great fit because both really work with space. So that's how it began. So it actually began from the work, not from the person. I mean, I knew of Merce Cunningham because I've been interested in done some collaborations for almost 2 decades, but I didn't know the man behind it. So and the idea was not to necessarily, capture his dances because he's very well captured. There's just so many different, videos of his work, and he made films himself. There are 18 films or so on his work. But the idea was really to try to translate his ideas into cinema with capital C, And if you start thinking about dance in cinematic terms, of course, you start thinking about spaces and places other than the stage. So that's how it sort of began. And then, as I was researching his work and life, then that the period sort of the film got established between 42 and 72. Primarily, these are the years of, years of real struggle when he really persevered against all odds. He didn't have any support, any money, any audience, any press, and he continued. And I think that really struck me the most. And that period of how Merce became Merce. So that was the sort of the framework, and that's how sort of I launched on this journey. I mean, the film did take 7 years to make. I mean, it was shot in 18 days. Just a little secret. This, in fact, that was, but half of this time, we spent on making the film, and half of the time we spent on convincing the world that we actually have to make this 3D film about this American avant-garde choreographer.
Well, and you talk about the 3D, and it's not, it's not just the fact that it's in 3D, but there's these just glorious shots and these locations where you filmed these dances. You know, you've got the tops of these buildings, you've got the sides of what seem to be very busy highways, you've got in the middle of these woods. So what came, was it the dances that inspired those locations? Talk about how those locations came to be, because they really are in many ways the focal point of seeing this beautiful dance in these beautiful locations.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the inspiration came from the dancers themselves, because again, once you start thinking about dance in cinematic terms, the stages go away and you get spaces and places. And Merce was a choreographer who always started with a physical question or a concept. For instance, you know, he'd make a dance based on the action of falling, or based on an action of people being close together, you know, tied by a rubber band, like physically, you know, close together. Or he'll make a dance based on the concept of layering and so on. So he came from those ideas. And, you know, I work with two amazing people, Robert Swinston, who worked with Merce for 32 years, and Jennifer Goggins, who worked with him for 12 years. And together we went through this extensive process of, you know, choosing different you know, dances from the period we, you know, identified. And then from those dances, choosing excerpts to be filmed in 3D. And now we identified those questions and concepts, you know, behind those dances, and then found locations as a way to communicate the idea. So if it's a dance based on the action of falling, we'll put in the rooftop, Winter Branch. If it's a dance based on the action togetherness, like Crisis, we'll put it in a very confined space. Now, we can't really build a lot of things because dancers have to have space to dance. So we would use, you know, a film language, such as in this case, is lighting, creating this kind of web that ties the dances together. You know, if it's a dance based on the concept of layering, we'll put in the woods where you have many sort of, you know, gazillion amount of layers, that the idea is sort of amplified, is more clear. But again, it's through cinema. Now, there are 14 dances, and each dance is a kind of like a movie in itself. It's almost like an event set in cinema. And it's also, you know, in a sense, very Cunningham, because Cunningham came up with this idea of events. It's those performances that were created specifically for specific locations, and he would come to a place and he would realize that he can't do a whole piece, so he would pull from different excerpts to create a new piece, you know, a collage of things, and then a new score often will be commissioned and written for that particular new dance. That's a collage of different excerpts. So that was the inspiration, but that's how we went about. And the tragedy about this all is that, you know, we wanted to shoot the film in New York, and we storyboarded and found all the locations and storyboarded everything for New York. And then it was clear that we can't afford doing that in New York. We didn't have enough funding. So we basically ended up doing everything in Europe. Most of the film was shot in Germany, 15 days in Germany, 2 days in France, and only one day in New York City. So we had to actually run around Germany, scout again, and we shot from Hamburg to Stuttgart with Cologne and Düsseldorf in the middle. So it was an extensive process of, you know, finding those locations and then measuring them out, you know, using all kinds of architecture programs to be able to, you know, storyboard everything to scale. And that's why I think we managed to sort of accomplish the impossible and shoot this film in so few days.
Well, and it's to me, it's so interesting what you just said about not being able to shoot it in New York and shooting a lot of it in Europe, because there are mentions, particularly in the film, of Cunningham, of kind of the New York American audiences really kind of struggling with his pieces, and he found a success, particularly in the UK and in Europe. What do you think it was about Cunningham that had that more of the appeal? I mean, he eventually had success in the United States, but what do you think it was that appealed to the European audience that the American audiences just didn't get?
It's a great question. I mean, you know, there's an amazing dancer and artist, Mikhail Baryshnikov, and he said once, you know, Cunningham made dances and waited for the audiences, you know, to see them. So in a way, I mean, people did not understand what he was doing for a very long time, because to understand what he was doing, in a way, you have to either have no preconceptions that just sort of come and allow yourself to watch, and just see what's there. And that's what, some people in America were able to do. And, the more they toured, the more friends they made around the country. But also you had to have background, in Europe, parents take children to see modern dance when they're 5, so they have just cultural education. The culture is part of the upbringing, and I think in order to appreciate something, you should be able to compare it to something. And Europeans just have much more background, just culturally, just that's sort of their story and their history that they could identify. They can say, oh my God, this is what he is doing, So all these avant-garde ideas were much more sort of obvious and apparent to them. It's this kind of, but it took a while, even in Europe. I mean, I think, the tomatoes were thrown and things were not always so good in Europe either, but eventually, people could recognize. I mean, some people compare this collaboration that Merce and John Cage and Robert Rauschenberg had to Diaghilev, which is a Russian impresario, ballet russe kind of era in the 1920s. But it's completely different because, it's not completely different, but it's a different tone of the whole thing, because Diaghilev was an impresario who put together, Bach, Nijinsky, and Stravinsky. Here people came together voluntarily. Nobody put them together. They chose to come together because they wanted to create things together. So I think that's definitely a fundamental difference. But a lot of people in Europe did compare this kind of collaboration of the art forms to the 1920s.
And it's so sad because we, in America, we don't have the same kind of, certainly national funding for the arts that many European countries have. And so therefore, I always like to ask this question, was particularly when it's about subjects involving the arts. What do you think is missing in terms of, in this 21st century era of technology and science? And, I've noticed that a lot of your documentaries, you talk, documentaries about, kind of the cultural things in Africa. And, are you drawn to this kind of artistic thing? And what do you think is missing from the 21st century? Is there something that draws you to these things that you think is just missing in the world of the arts today?
Well, I actually don't think it's missing in the arts. I think it's missing in cinema, actually. I think cinema was born as a sort of an art form to capture emotion. And, the first and the most interesting move were the dances. So actually, the first filmmakers, they filmed a lot of dance. And the people who made cinema what it is today were physical performers. Think about the whole silent film era. I mean, all these people, Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, physical comedians, all of them had, physical education or some kind of performing arts education, whether they were in vaudeville or, acrobatics or circus or whatever it is. So, every battler in the Hollywood movie from 1930s had a language, had gestures, Words were not everything. Now I feel like because of the technology primarily, we don't have to, perform as though actors don't have to do any of it. Because there's just always a way to, magnify, amplify, figure out, nobody has to kick anybody. You can just sort of create that, through the effects. And I think I'm really on a sort of a mission about bringing back physicality into cinema. And if you think in sort of marrying performing arts and cinema, for the big screen, and if you think about which films people remember, just think about it for a moment. I mean, you're going to think about West Side Story and All That Jazz and Singing in the Rain. And, that's across the board, actually. And every time there's a musical, whether it's Chicago or Dreamgirls, I mean, there's just this huge uproar, La La Land, So it's very interesting how much people are still interested in that and how few films that are out there, because it's not about kind of a showbiz, it's about this very, it's about physicality in cinema and what can it do and what can it sort of convey, And so I think working with dancers, and I'd love to bring dancers into the film world. Because right now it all goes backwards. It's always actors who learn how to dance, and then they try to dance, and they not always can. If you really kind of be honest about that, But why? I mean, why don't we bring dancers who can act? Because I think it's harder to learn how to dance if you haven't done it, especially for a very long time. But it's also not easy to act. So the kind of so I'm looking for this kind of people and subjects and try to sort of, because I'm on that kind of mission. So I think and I'm interested in the ideas the choreographers have, because I think they can offer a lot to cinema too.
So with that in mind, are there future subjects along that line that you want to explore? Are there people, are there movements that you want to explore that you can maybe give us a hint about?
I think I don't have enough lifetime to actually do all, to tell the truth. But it depends. It a little bit depends what will happen with this movie. So I think it's really good if people go watch it. I mean, I definitely want to make a fiction film, the next film, but I think it's really good if people go watch it, because I don't think people need to know anything about Merce Cunningham. I don't think they need to know anything about dance. His story is formidable and anybody can relate to it, and we all have our bodies which deteriorate from birth, as he says, every moment. So we can all find something interesting and can relate to what he's been through, even though he's, this avant-garde American choreographer who would never call himself avant-garde, by the way. But yeah, so I think, I do have things in mind, but it's definitely a very kind of, they're all sort of different directions that I'm exploring.
Well, we hope people go to see this film. The movie is Cunningham, Alla Kovgan. Congratulations. Everybody go to goldderby.com. Make your predictions for the Oscars, SAG, Golden Globes. And Alla, congratulations on a wonderful film. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Take care.